Hello there, it is a Tuesday, which means it's time for another in real life video. This week, we are taking a general viewer submitted question. As always, feel free to submit your own in the comments below. If you have one, it helps me a ton if you put a question mark in the comment for when I go and Control F and add it to the ever-growing list of questions. Of course, if it's too personal or breaks terms of service, we'll probably avoid answering it. Hopefully you understand. Anyway, this week's comes from a general viewer who, well, first of all, their username should be at the bottom third of the screen right about now. And let me see here, let me adjust my mic a bit more. They ask, they ask, who/what is your favorite antagonist of the Elder Scrolls games? I love Miraak. And I think that's kind of a fun question. It's certainly one that I've talked about a bit before, but not one that, I probably wouldn't give away my answer just anywhere. So, I do think that there are some very fun villains, right? Obviously, we're going to have spoilers here for Elder Scrolls games, vaguely, right? And, I'll say right away, pretty heavy spoilers for Morrowind, we'll cover here, right? So if you want to play Morrowind and you don't want any spoiler whatsoever, maybe avoid this, right? But I would say, sort of taking a step back, I would say that my favorite villains in the Elder Scrolls tend to be villains that represent an idea, or are not an individual, or perhaps are an individual that represent an institution, right? Or a faction, or a group, right? Something larger than just one individual. I do think Miraak is pretty cool, and in many ways kind of can be made to represent, the Dragon Priest, and sort of can help in some ways work as a way of recontextualizing and looking at the Dragonborn in a slightly different way, right? But definitely my favorite villains are the ones that, like I said, are themselves an institution or represent an institution or an idea. So, for example, in Skyrim, we'll work our way backward, I suppose. In Skyrim, I absolutely love the Thalmor as a villain, right? Just an overall faction. They don't have, at present in Skyrim, they don't have a main figurehead, right? Whoever is the main general or commander of the overall Thalmor, they're not present there, right? But I do like fighting them as sort of an idea. That said, I find them somewhat uncomplicated, right? I find them somewhat uncomplex. There's little nuance there. They're just, I think that's fine as well to have a villain that lacks nuance. I think it's fine, right? I think it's okay to just have a villain to where it's yeah, obviously they're bad. They're like elf Nazis, right? I think it's fine to have a villain that doesn't necessarily demand some degree of analysis or some sort of twist or anything like that, right? I think it's fine. Sort of more crucially, though, you know what? Hang on. I'll hold that answer for now, right? Because we'll build up to that. But this is something that is in Skyrim. For Oblivion, I'm trying to think of various Oblivion villains. I think Mannimarco is kind of fun, but all in all, I kind of find Oblivion's villains to be a little lacking, I would say. I don't find them super compelling. They're just kind of, they feel very evil for evil's sake, at least my recollection of them. It has been a while since I last played Oblivion. I don't find there to be too much going on there of interest, right? They're fun, goofy villains in their own way. They're they're more aligned with like a force of nature. Like if we look at Mehrunes Dagon as the overarching villain of Oblivion, or even oh god, what's his name with his famous stunt-casted voice actor, the dude who is effectively responsible for the summoning of Mehrunes Dagon and reading the Mysterium Xarxes. You know the guy, the elf guy, the Altmer dude. But I find them to be somewhat uncompelling because there could have been, I feel, more political intrigue between that group, between him, the Mythic Dawn, and the Tamrielic Empire, and Uriel Septim the Seventh. I feel like there could have been more, but when it comes to stuff like that, Oblivion probably, unfortunately, is a little bit lax, I think, in much like, I don't know, political or societal commentary by way of using like fictional factions and groups and stuff like that. It's pretty lax in it when it should be a setting where it's rife with it, right? That's often a frequent complaint, right? Because you do sort of have Cyrodiil being this like immense boiling pot of a lot of different cultures and people brushing up against the Empire from, the many different provinces and stuff. And there's just very little of that there, right? There's significantly more of it in Skyrim. There's significantly more of it in Morrowind relative to Oblivion, which isn't to say that Oblivion is bad. It's just fun in a very different way, right? It's kind of goofy, not super serious. Even though, the threat is real. It is a very, like, real, serious threat, demons pouring out of a gate. But, they feel very much like Alduin or Alduin, whichever pronunciation you prefer, in that they're more of a force of nature. They're more of a weapon themselves than an idea to wield a weapon, if that makes any sense. You've also got the Shivering Isles, which honestly, the more I think back to it, the more I kind of unfortunately sour on the Shivering Isles. But that's a story for another time. It's neither here nor there. There is Sheogorath and Jigalag, I believe. Which, once again, I don't know. I find it kind of... Right? It's a fun dichotomy. It's a fun, goofy dichotomy that especially really worked in the time in which Oblivion came out. Right? In like, oh, there's a character that's very definition, or very... Not very definition, but is very heavily troped and used to the effect of being like, LOL, so random. Oh, this character is like very purple monkey dishwasher. That being Sheogorath. And then there is sort of a character that's very antithetical to that being Jigalag. Which, I don't know. It is what it is. Like I said, I don't find it terribly compelling. They're either just like sinister for the sake of being it, or they feel more like a force of nature, right? There's no interesting like thought behind them, right? If we go even further back to Morrowind, I think Morrowind is chock full of pretty good villains. Less so individuals, right? But, and this is where we're getting into the Morrowind spoilers, undoubtedly, if we want to just look at villains for the sake of being a villain, probably my least favorite is Hircine from the Blood Moon expansion, because that sort of goes back to like why I'm not super compelled by an enemy like I don't know, Oblivion's Mannimarco, who supposedly is way better in ESO, right? Let me just get that out there. Supposedly Mannimarco has way more writing and way more intriguing writing in ESO, so there is that. But like I said, it sort of goes back to the vibe of them being more of a force of nature. There's not like a compelling ideology behind them. With Hircine, it's just like a horrible prophecy has come to light. Now that said, like I mentioned, Morrowind is filled with fantastic antagonists and villains. Just from the top, Dagoth Vorin Dagoth, fantastic villain, made made to that level, to that status, by being so tragic. There is like such an immense sadness and tragedy about the overarching narrative of Morrowind and sort of Vorin Dagoth's ties to the Nerevarine and the Tribunal. And I find that incredibly compelling. But in that sense, I do, like I said, I find Vorin Dagoth and Dagoth Ur to be very tragic. If anything, I sort of empathize for them. I'm like, wow, how could this have gone a different way? If things played out differently at the Battle of Red Mountain, you could have been a completely different person, right? You're sort of doomed by your own loyalty and love for Indoril Nerevar, right? Which that is kind of beautiful and like wonderful in and of itself. Throughout Morrowind Mondays Volume 2, I regularly, especially when we were going through the core game, I would regularly sort of remark, oh, Morrowind, at least at its heart, is a game about heartbreak, right? And I find that to be incredibly true. I very much think there was something going on between Indoril Nerevar and Vorin Dagoth. I think anybody who says otherwise, I don't know. you don't know what you're talking about. But even better, I think, than Vorin Dagoth as a villain, I absolutely love the Tribunal as a villainous force, as an antagonistic force. I sort of love the big reveal. I love the ways in which, granted, you don't get too much of Sotha-Sil in Morrowind itself, right? You have to go into either mods or, I believe, once again, Sotha-Sil is heavily a part of expansions in ESO, right? There's quite a few where Sotha-Sil factors in heavily. So that's sort of beyond my purview and out of my consideration for now. Apologies. But just between Vivek and, sorry, what's her name? Almalexia. Just between the two of them, I think it's such a interesting dichotomy, the ways in which they're characterized and they sort of, I don't know, boil within their own guilt. They sort of like writhe within their own guilt and process it in different ways, right? Vivek sort of feels this weird guilt about everything that had happened, and thus, Vivek as well being like this full of symbolism for duality, right? You get that feeling of like, oh, something more sinister, but also at the same time, someone who wants to kind of repent in a way for the horrors in which they have partaken. And then the complete flip side is someone who is a bit more of like a two-dimensional villain, as it were, in the form of Almalexia, someone who is a bit more sinister and just backstabbing. You do get that, and I feel like those working all in tandem really does it for me. And then even going beyond, well, also before we go there, before we get beyond this, I think as well, they work great as being the embodiment of certain, of like an institution, the Tribunal Temple themselves, even removing Vivek and Almalexia from the equation, is so incredibly fascinating to me, because it offers you opportunities to explore the ways in which a like religious faction like the Tribunal Temple can be wielded in different ways, right? For instance, they have like the very 1984 inspired Ministry of Truth, where they're like brainwashing people. You can see corruption among higher ranking members of the Tribunal Temple, wherein they're completely, taking part in an abuse of power. You have like effectively martial law. You have like a theocratic religious police in the form of the Ordinators. And then you have an even weirder mix, sort of mixing in this like gallantry and poetry with regards to the Boonian Armigers, which is very weird. And frankly, I think a little unexplored. You have that. And then you, like I said, you also have you'll go out, if you join the Tribunal Temple yourself in that game, you can find no shortage of people who do believe in this effectively like manufactured and false faith. But what really is the faith, right? If these people are gods and they are sort of exacting their will and they have godlike power, you can't really blame someone for like believing in that, right? Especially when they're like, yeah, we're the gods. Look at us. We're here doing miracles. We're keeping a moon in the sky. Whoops. Don't look at what we keep inside of that moon. Don't look at what we do in there. But a lot of that I find super duper compelling. Looking at, like I was about to say, looking at sort of a smaller scale where you have like people operating within the temple who are fairly low rank, but they still mean very well, right? They sort of really do believe in the teachings, and the teachings themselves that they're being taught by these organizations, probably like 90% of the time, if not more, are genuinely good things, right? They're genuinely like, oh, help people out, learn healing magic so that way if someone is diseased by fighting a wild creature or whatever, you can help them out, something like that. Be charitable toward people. It's generally good lessons, and you see people who are like lower ranking members of the Tribunal Temple sort of helping out. There'll be people, like for instance in our Tamriel Rebuild playthrough, granted it's a mod, but it sort of builds off of this, wherein they have like effectively a soup kitchen for the less fortunate and stuff like that. And they are still, like I said, they are still a part of the Tribunal Temple. They're just at a lower level. There is that degree of nuance. There is that degree of commentary on, like, well, really any sort of religious institution, right? The Tribunal Temple serves as that. Sort of, so too does the Imperial cult, right? Because not only do you have that, but you have sort of an opposition version of exactly what you're doing, right? In the form of the Imperial cult. You have hostile version of what you are in that form. I do enjoy that. Oh, and another really cool and interesting institution, sort of institution-style villain, I think, is the Great Houses, right? Specifically in our recent playthrough, Morrowind Monday's Tamriel Rebuilt, man, I love Great House Hlalu as a sort of villain. I love when they're played as a villain because you get to explore sort of ways in which, like, capitalist forces manipulate people for gain and will say something on the one hand, but then behind their back, they're completely screwing over people for profit and personal gain without you looking, right? And Great House Hlalu sort of affords you the opportunity to either partake or expose those sorts of things, right? Even in the core game, you get to see sort of the hypocrisy at play between them, especially with Great House Hlalu trying to buddy up with the Tamrielic Empire by espousing more egalitarian ideals, right? Great House Hlalu profuses to be anti-slavery, right? Because they want to be within the good graces of the Tamrielic Empire, who have long since outlawed slavery, right? Which, does make sense within their lore because the Tamrielic Empire was originally founded by the Elysian Empire, Saint Alicia herself. They all were. It all began from a slave revolt against the Aliads many, many years ago. I believe, correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I got this stuff pretty nailed down. But, of course, there is an immense hypocrisy within, especially, like I said, the higher ranks of Great House Hlalu, wherein, like I said, they proclaim to be anti-slavery, and yet their higher-ranking members, Duke Vidam Dren, on Vardenfell, in the core game, he is heavily in bed with his brother, right? Orvistren, I think it was. But he is the sort of de facto leader of the Cammona Tong, a really, like, hyper-racist, ultra-nationalist, bigoted, pro-slavery criminal organization operating on Vardenfell, right? He is like literally the brother of him and tries to hide and cover up a lot of his stuff because, you know, he's a politician in the making, or sort of not in the making, but on the rise. He wants to maintain that, but, you know, he's got skeletons in his closet with regards to his brother who runs the Cammona Tong. And then you also get ways in which you can see, like, how, you know, recently with various labor abuses that we have seen in... I guess I probably shouldn't talk too much about the modded stuff that we have done, right? But man, I do think Tamriel Rebuilt really does a great job of, like, fleshing out what was already there. But we just recently covered, like, there's a... Not even in Great House Hlaalu, but you encounter Great House Hlaalu and do work for them, wherein you effectively play a Pinkerton and are, like, busting a union, right? And of course, you can choose to go a different route with that and be a little bit more empathetic toward the miners whose union you're busting, right? But there's so much like that. There is stuff like that with mines in like Caldera in the core game. But yeah, very good stuff there. And that sort of leads to perhaps my favorite villain, I think, now that I think of it. My favorite villain in all of Elder Scrolls, if I had to pick one, my favorite antagonistic institution, it's probably the Tamrielic Empire. And I say that as someone who sided and would still, like, if you legitimately ask me, like, would you rather side with the Stormcloaks or with the Tamrielic Empire, I would probably go with the Empire every time. During the period of Skyrim, out of the sheer interest of they have the best chance of defeating the Thalmor, who are, like, the far greater threat. But I love the way in which throughout that you sort of see all this political intrigue and these comparisons that, like, the Stormcloaks make, and a lot of their grievances with the Empire are entirely valid and are grievances that were brought up hundreds of years ago in Morrowind, right? With regards to the Great House Dunmer, and even the Ashlander Dunmer, which is another great thing that I love about Morrowind, is, like, how there's so many different tiers of, like, political caste and, like, socioeconomic caste within the world there, right? You have the Ashlanders, you have House Dunmer, and then you have, like, people who are effectively gods, right? And then you have politicians and all that stuff, right? It's very juicy. And honestly, woven together shockingly well for its time, I think. But the only issue there is that it's very difficult to absorb it all on just one playthrough, as we had noted in our second playthrough with Tamriel Rebuilt installed, just of the core game, mind you. But there's just so much there, and you sort of glean more by playing through it multiple times or having seen someone else play through it as well, right? But it's just fantastic stuff, I think, sort of calling or taking a look at the Tamrielic Empire and its shortcomings and sort of the ways in which they try to assimilate other cultures, right? I mean, lest we forget, like, at the forefront, they are an empire. All of the provinces and stuff that we love and want to go and visit in different games and stuff like that, they've all been conquered, right? They're all subjected to the emperor, whoever is acting at the time, and everyone had to suffer under the horror of war as brought down upon them by Tiber Septim. I think there's great stuff with that. Just as well, the way in which they bounce off of the Thalmor, right? Who are really, really horrible, but at the same time, their big point about Tiber Septim, about Talos, I think bears an important sort of, it bears looking at, right? It bears looking at. That said, it's easy enough to arrive at a conclusion about sort of the status and sort of changing of a man, Tiber Septim, into Talos, sort of a godlike deity who is no longer alive, mind you, isn't like a living god or anything, but has has become sort of an idea more so than a person, right? You have ascended literally to godhood, and also within the minds of people, right? I feel like there's something worth examining there. You get issues or cool stuff going on with like their economic situation with regards to like the East Empire Company. I love the East Empire Company as like an antagonistic force. I think they're fantastic, especially in lieu of a Great House Hlalu. Man, I hope that the East Empire Company shows up and has either like evolved or are just like a more overwhelming force in the next game. I would absolutely love that. I really enjoy them as a villainous sort of antagonistic force. Like I said, just more ways in which we can utilize an antagonist as sort of an institution to sort of look at real world parallels and sort of take a lesson from that, right? Or sort of recontextualize stuff that we normally think about in a different way or whatever. I very much enjoy that. And I think that's kind of the strong suit of it, right? I think having the Tamrielic, I think they're fantastic. I think they're, right? They do have a lot of good things going on, right? Sort of not unlike what I mentioned with the Tribunal Temple, wherein there are lower rank and file members who are all right. But there are also a lot of problems with it, right? And as I mentioned, that's sort of the darn shame with Oblivion is that they're very much poised and posed as a helpful force, right? There's very little room for nuance. There's very little people saying like, well, gosh, the Empire kind of sucks, actually, which, fair enough, there is literally a crisis going on, right? It sort of takes precedent to deal with literal demons pouring out of, like, Oblivion gates, it understandably takes some degree of precedence. But yeah, that's probably my favorite antagonistic force in all of Elder Scrolls has got to be the Tamrielic Empire, right? I think they make for fantastic storytelling. I like them so much, I can't help but in other games sort of compare the Tamrielic Empire to other sort of major super factions in this regard, right? For instance, in our Starfield playthrough, I cannot help but enjoy the United Colonies as an overarching faction because they feel so familiar. They feel so similar to the Tamrielic Empire, right? In that they're so overarching. So many of the like large and small problems within that universe or whatever all stem from this super faction that has sort of reached out and touched everything, right? And they're so complicated. They have interesting politics. They have different facets of it going on, of like different parts of it going on and stuff like that. And you also have to factor in like whenever different people come into power, it started from like very egalitarian and like, I don't know, righteous beginnings with the slave revolt in the Elysian Empire. It's just fantastic stuff, I think. I think there's such a great way in which the Tamrielic Empire could be wielded for great storytelling for just like years to come, right? Because it could always serve as like a stand-in for any sort of like real world organization and like a fun way to look at real world like politics and ideology and I don't know, various ethics and stuff like that, like I mentioned with the East Empire Company. Yeah, that's gotta be it. And like I said, I would really love them to play up more with the East Empire Company and make them more of like, even more so of a like ruthless capitalist like faction that they sort of allude to in the past, right? Even through Morrowind, where they're very like early on with Morrowind, but you do, probably my favorite part of Morrowind is dealing with the East Empire Company not favorite part of Morrowind, of the Blood Moon expansion for Morrowind, I should say, is dealing with this like nascent form of the East Empire Company. That is fantastic, and they're shown there as well to be like very ruthless in that same way, very cold-blooded capitalism, very, very, very on the nose, I guess, with the icy theme of Solstheim. But you sort of see that again as well in Skyrim. Yeah, I really enjoy that. I really love them in that way. I think it's cool when you have stuff like that sort of crash into more of the supernatural stuff, or they wield the supernatural stuff as sort of a weapon, because then you get into fun like rules with regards to like fantasy rules and stuff like that, where this Daedric prince or whatever operates in this way, and this antagonistic faction or this splinter group within this otherwise somewhat okay faction, right, they're wielding this Daedric prince or whatever in this way, or they're wielding a Daedric artifact in this way, or an alien artifact as well. You could have that happen as well. Like I said, it's cool to see it when these sort of things that can operate as stand-ins for real world stuff sort of interact with the fantasy in a fun way. It sort of spices it up and gives you, like, I don't know, fun MacGuffins to deal with and fun ways in which you can think about it, sort of compared to like real world stuff. And then also it's fun to think about on the level of like, oh, well, Daedric princes running around. This is how the rules work on Nirn and stuff like that. It makes for a fun and enjoyable mix, and makes it kind of, I don't know, makes you think about stuff, I guess, right? Which I kind of enjoy. I very thoroughly enjoy stuff like that. So that ought to do it, I think. Tamrielic Empire. Love them, hate them. God, they make for a fantastic narrative device. I love immense super factions, I think. Yeah, I think maybe I'll commit to that. I think I generally love super factions in games wherein they have so much stuff sort of comes into contact with it, because I just love all the various bits of storytelling and nuance that you get from weaving information in and out of this one super faction, and how it all splits off different characters within the world, interpreted in different ways, and sort of have their own takes on the situation. And you can wield those takes, like I said, to be like contemporary commentary on real world stuff in that sense. Very good. Very fantastic. I love it. I hope, like I said, I hope they do more with it in the next game and going forward forever. Right? I hope they keep doing it. Like I said, that's kind of an overarching thing that I enjoy in a lot of games. Yeah. All right. That'll do it. We'll wrap this thing up. Goodness, we went a little bit long here, but hey, this is something that I enjoy talking about, for better or worse. I do like talking about this stuff. As I said, feel free to submit a question if you got one. That'll do it. Until next time, please take care of each other.